Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you, to have the opportunity to share a few thoughts this morning, ladies and gentlemen, with what I call the great demographic disruption. A set of demographic trends that are dramatically transforming all of our social, economic, and political institutions, including both K-12 and higher education. My views on these disruptive demographic trends I bring to you as a demographer, PhD-trained demographer. My views I bring to you as a professor of higher education for the last 40 years. And my views I bring to you as the founder and board chair for a public charter school in North Carolina. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, I want to suggest to you, you got to buckle your seatbelt to deal with them. There are lots of things we can debate today politically. I want to suggest to you that basic demography is not one of them. I assure you, if you're 5 years old today, 5 years from now, you're going to be 10 years old. Your birthday comes the same time, you just add one to what it was last year, and voila, you got it. In fact, every year when I go for my annual review with my dean, I come out with a big raise. So I walk in, I tell him, you know, when we met last year, I was 64 years old. You know what? I'm 65 now. When we meet next year, I'm going to be 66. It's called forecasting. I'm the best in the business. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in, we call them disruptive changes. There are 6 of them I want to share with you today. We're going to list them and talk about them at a high level. We don't have time to deal deeply. And then I want to wrap up by talking about what I see as the challenges in K-12 and higher education. First one is the South rises again. The second one is the browning of America. The third one is marrying out is in. The fourth one is the silver tsunami is about to hit. The fifth one, the end of men. I would leave it as a question mark, given that I am a man, but we'll talk about it. And the last one is cooling water from Grandma's well. Anybody know what that is? It's actually a song. I can't sing a lick, so don't worry about me singing it to you, but I'm going to tell you what it's all about. Cooling water from Grandma's well and Grandpa's too. Let's talk about each one of them. When I talk about the South continues to rise again, I'm talking about the southern United States as defined by the Census Bureau, those states in red on this graphic. Ladies and gentlemen, if you know your history, you know that that region, we'll just limit it to the 20th century and bring it forward for this time. You know that that was an economically backwards region. It had all kinds of racial problems for much of the 20th century. What that meant demographically then, that was the place to leave as opposed to the place to be or to come to. I actually grew up in North Carolina. I went to high school in 1968, which means I was in the first wave of school integration in the South. And I remember my freshman year in high school. Let's just say I was on the football team. Most people say they were athletes, but let's just say I was on the team. and I remember quite vividly, our first game was an away game. And when we arrived at the stadium to play the team, the KKK was marching outside the stadium, daring us to beat the opposing team. We beat them so bad they couldn't spell KKK by the end of the night. But that was the South at the time. A few eggs on our bus and the like. I couldn't wait to get out of the South when I graduated from college in 1972. If you look at the data, you see something interesting. From about 1910 to about 1970, the South only captured about 30% of net national population growth in this country. Why? Because more people were leaving the region than going there. To the extent that the South grew during that period, it was an excess of births over deaths. And then something profound occurred around 1970, and the South rises again means, ladies and gentlemen, in every decade since 1970, the South has captured over half of net national population growth in this country. We've gone from a region where we speak 2 languages, English and bad English, to one we speak more than 300 different languages today. We have become demographically the cat's meow in terms of destination selection. We are a net importer of migrants from every other region of the country. More people coming in to the South and leaving the region for those various reasons. We are demographically the place to be. If you look at the latest numbers, we've added about 17 million people to our population since 2010, between 2010 and 2017. About 55% of that net growth, 9.1 million people concentrated in the South. You'll note the second high concentration in the West region. What's going on in our country is this profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to the South, to the West and the South, and tag tag, we are it in the South in terms of destination selection. And it's everybody moving to the South. It's not selected. Look at it. Look at the South. Total migrants, whites, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, the elderly, the native-born, the foreign-born, everybody moving to the South in larger numbers and leaving. You can't say that about the West region. The West region, the only group moving there in larger numbers than we're leaving were the Asian population. You come to the Midwest, the only group moving there were the Hispanics in larger numbers. And this is a news flash after the latest cold snap. They're going to be the heck out of there too, so just buckle your seatbelt. And the Northeast is kind of like when the last person leaves, please turn off the lights if there's still any on there. Profound redistribution of population. What does that mean? It means that a lot of the demographic dynamics that we're confronted with in this country are going to play out in the South region of the country. But I lied to you. I said it's the South. It's really not the South. This movement is about 5 states in the South. It's about Texas. It's about Florida. It's about North Carolina. It's about Georgia and Virginia. Those 5 states captured about 77% of that net population growth. It doesn't mean the other states aren't growing, but these are migration magnet states. 2 of them are mature immigration gateways, Texas and Florida, and the others are new Hispanic magnets or new population magnets in general, transforming the change in our distribution of our population. Undergirding that redistribution of population are 2 colorful demographic changes that are transforming the complexion of our society. One is the browning of America, and the other one is the graying of America. Let me talk about browning of America first. This is about immigration-driven population change in our country. Quick immigration history. If you look at the history of immigration dating back to 1900s, bringing it to 2017, what you will see in our country is that we kept immigration in our country relatively low from about the turn of the 20th century to about the 1970 and in particular to 1965. Until that time, ladies and gentlemen, we had an immigration policy in America that says if we were going to allow the foreign-born to enter our country, it was important that they not upset the existing racial and ethnic balance of our country as it existed at the turn of the 20th century. So we had an express preference for people who were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons, people who had come to America, anglicized their names, learned to speak English and the like, and voila, this thing called a melting pot was supposed to work. In other words, we operated on a quota system that favored people basically from Western Europe, but we operated on a quota system that was geographically discriminatory against people from certain regions of the world. Go back to the 1880s for an example. What you will note is we had something called the Chinese exclusion law. They shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be quote unquote difficult to assimilate into mainstream society. Fast forward to the first decade of the 20th century, we identified what we call the Asiatic barrier region that included Japan. They shouldn't be allowed to come to America, and we justified those rules based on a series of racist theories about cultural inferiority. So we control the composition of our population based on our immigration law. That all changed in 1965 because coincidence with the civil rights movement in domestic life, we liberalized our immigration law, opening up the doors of our country to people who heretofore had not been allowed to come in large numbers. We did that via something called the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. Put a pin in it because it's one of the most profound pieces of legislation that's responsible for the diversity of our population. What did that act do? It eliminated those discriminatory provisions based on geographic origin, opening up the doors of our country basically to people from Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. These are all people of color, ladies and gentlemen. And what you will notice is not only did we open up our doors, we heighten the number of people that we're allowed to come. So you see that huge increase in the number of people that have been arriving in our population in this country today. I'm going to come back to what changes we're making contemporarily now in just a minute. Who are those migrants? Well, about 46% of them are Hispanic, Latinx population. You'll note the second largest group at 26% are Asians. But the other thing you need to know is that the white, non-Hispanic foreign-born population is only about 18% of that population of the foreign mix. If you looked at these numbers prior to 1965, those numbers would have been flipped because we had the preference. When I'm talking about the browning of America, I'm talking about the source of growth and where growth is coming from. It's basically from Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East in terms of our growth. Now, when you did your 2010 census, they asked you to self-identify. And they asked the first question, are you Hispanic or are you non-Hispanic? If you said you were Hispanic, you checked the Hispanic box and then you continued through the survey. If you said, I'm not Hispanic, they kind of asked the following question, well, what the heck are you? Are you non-Hispanic, white, black, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian Native, or a person of mixed race, 2 or more races? During the first decade of the new millennium, we added 27 million people to our population in this country. You will note that 15.2 million of that 27 million people were Hispanic. You will go up to above the top yellow line, you note that only about 12.2 million self-identified as non-Hispanic. But the number I want to draw your attention to is the increase in the non-Hispanic white population. It grew by 2.3 million people, or about 1.2%. Everybody between those two yellow lines, and inclusive of the bottom yellow line, those are people of color, ladies and gentlemen. You will notice double-digit growth in everybody but American Indians, Alaska Natives. That's at 8.9%. That's close enough for me. That's good enough for government work. I'll take it. It's double-digit growth. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the browning of America, is the source of growth. Look at since 2010 to 2017, when we added another 16 million people, 5% growth in the total population. The non-Hispanic white share of the population grew by 0.4%. Everybody to the right of that purple line, those are all people of color. That's what's driving the browning of America in our country. That's what's going to dramatically transform. It's already transforming our school system. That's what it's going to continue to transform our school system. What share of that growth was non-white? 91% of net growth was non-white, and about 50% of that growth was Hispanic, Latinx population. Here in the South, in the South, it was about 83% and 42% respectively. Those migration magnet states, you see those shares transforming our population. That's what I mean by the browning of America. It's so important to our future, ladies and gentlemen, because what you have to understand is that migration and immigration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? It means far more young people migrate and immigrate than old people. This doesn't mean old people don't move. They move slower and at a lower propensity than young folks. There's one more piece to that story. Please don't repeat this anywhere. You can lose your job. In fact, I'm denying I say this before I say it. Young people are more likely to have children than old folks. Like, you put those two things together, it impacts the age structure in your community. Look at the data. So the median age of the U.S. population in 2017 was 38. Half of us older than that, half of us younger than that. Last row, second column, what's the median age of a Hispanic in America? 29 years old. How many of you in the illegal immigration debate, or the immigration debate in general, have heard that Hispanics are a burden on the healthcare system in America? What kind of major health problems do you have when your median age is 29? Before you answer that, somebody tell me what the median age of a white non-Hispanic is in America. 44 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're in your 20s, you usually have acute medical crisis. Like you stuck your finger in a lawnmower, you got to go get it glued back on. But when you move from your 20s to your 40s, your health conditions move from acute to what? Chronic. Which one costs the most? Chronic. Trust me, I lost my wife to cancer at 48 years old. Her treatment in the last 6 months of life, $5,000 a week. Just lost a dear friend, a rare form of throat cancer. His treatment, $17,000 a week. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of what you hear makes no sense. These are young people, and we're going to need them to propel our nation moving forward. There's one more piece to this story, and this is for the ladies in the room. Ladies, you can tell the guys have closed their ears, but I think they need to hear this, so tell them to wake up, okay? Ladies, there's something in demography called completed fertility, okay? I won't give you the big theory about that today. Come to Chapel Hill, pay us $200,000 a year. I'll tell you early and often. Let me give you the pop version. Ladies, completed fertility is when you tell your husband, go take out the trash, ain't nothing else happening here, okay? Completed fertility for women occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. There's this precipitous drop in fertility during those ages. What's the median age of a non-Hispanic white female? Last row, third down. What's the median age of a non-Hispanic white female in America? 45 years old. Last row, what's the median age of a Hispanic female in America? 30 years old. Now, between those two numbers, those are all women of color. You'll note a 10 to 20 year gap in the median age. Those women of color are 10 to 20 years, what? Younger than the non-Hispanic white female. Do you know what that fertility gap is? That's your fertility gap. We know exactly where kids are going to come from. Now, I know that some of y'all in your 40s smile, I'm going home and fix this tonight. With permission of Jeremy and his folks, good folks, I say leave now. Every stoplight on the way home, let it cycle to 3 or 4 times. stop by your favorite drugstore, get whatever color pill you need. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to do what a 29-year-old can do moving forward. It's biology, ladies and gentlemen. It's not sociology. You build a wall around your country and try to keep everybody out, you got a slight problem. It's called the future competitiveness of our nation because we need that talent to propel us moving forward. We see the impact. In 1990, 66% of all births in America were to non-Hispanic white families. That dropped to 50% by 2008. For the first time in history in 2011, the non-Hispanic white share of the birth curve births dropped below 50%. It's unlikely to go the other way because of these fundamental shifts in demography. The browning of America is going to be driven by shifting fertility, such that we're talking about a heck of a color adjustment in our population. In 2005, the non-Hispanic white share was at about 67% of the total population. 10 years earlier, it was about 74%. We're projecting by 2050 it's going to drop to 47%. That growth is going to occur among these non-white immigrants and non-white populations that will transform the complexion of our society. Further contributing to the browning of America is a profound shift in marriage patterns in American society. You know, all of you, until the mid-1960s, it was even illegal for blacks and whites to marry. That all changed, but I'm not just talking about black-white marriages. I'm talking about a more profound shift in marriage patterns. The out-marriage rate means you marry someone that's a different racial and ethnic group than you. From the 1967 to about 2015, increased among newlyweds from 3% of all marriage to about 17% of all marriages, and it went from about 3% to about 10% of all married. Those are newly married at the top, all married at the bottom of that. Well, who's doing all this hooking up in strange kinds of ways around here? Well, about 42% of those marriages are between Hispanics and whites. About 15% of them are between Asians and whites. In both cases, in 14% of the cases, both marriage partners are non-white, black and Asian, Asian and Hispanic, or something of that nature. Note that black-white marriages are the smallest share. There's this other group, I don't know who the heck they are, but they're hooking up and they're dramatically transforming the complexion of our society. What's the significance, ladies and gentlemen? Behind the Asian and Hispanic population, the second most or third most rapidly growing population is people who self-identify as two or more races. What does that mean for education? It means that the kids walking in our school doors increasingly won't fit into the nice and neat little crucibles we're accustomed to putting them in, and they won't allow you to put them into those clusters. So be careful how you portray family life and community and the like in your advertising and marketing, and think about the curricular implications of the shift in demography to make sure that everybody who we teach have a presence and feel like they belong in those environments, because all of this is very important. All of this is doubly, triply important because at the same time that immigration is changing the complexion of our society, our nation is an aging nation, what I call the graying of America, okay? Now, immigration transforms the complexion. The aging is about graying is about aging of our native-born population, and in particular, a native-born non-Hispanic white population. Let's just get this out of the way. How do you know if you're part of the graying of America? Okay? 4 ways. Number 1, if you have difficulty seeing this screen, you're part of the graying of America. Number 2, if you got to go to the restroom twice during this presentation, you're part of the graying of America. Number 3, if you fall asleep during this presentation, you're just an old codger, you're part of the graying of America. The graying of America is about 3 things. It's about changes in longevity, it's about declining fertility, and it's about a group of us born between 1946 and 1964. We're called the boomer generation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living much longer today than we ever anticipated in our history. When we introduced Social Security in American society in 1935, the average person turning 65 was going to live another 12.7 years. That same person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years. And we now think living to 100 on a routine basis is well within reach. And there's one school of thought that says the person who lived to 130 has already been born. Why? Well, we got major medical advances that are doing what? Extending our lives. Some of y'all are eating better some of the time. Some of you all are exercising some of the time. And we now got this thing called regenerative medicine. We got a scientist in North Carolina has regenerated a bladder. So your bladder wear out, we'll sell you no. When you just ask me what color you want. We're working on every body part now, and we have these longevity hotspots around the world where people live forever. We're studying them, and then Google several years ago developed a company called Calico, where the purpose of the company is to defeat death by prolonging life, leveraging big data analytics to understand disease etiologies and relationships that we never had the capability of dealing with in the past. We think there'll be well over 600,000 centenarians by 2050. I've seen some new numbers, put it in the range of 750,000 to 1 million people, 100 or over in our country, and the numbers globally are even bigger than that. The other thing contributing to the graying of America is a profound change in fertility behavior of women. And you understand how it has changed, you have to look at those women at the end of the fertility years, the 40 to 44-year-old population. Take a 30-year view. 1976, 10% of women 40 to 44 in America did not have children. Fast forward 30 years to 2006, it went from 10% to 20% not having any children at all. They're not adding at the lower end of the gene pool. In 1976, the average woman 40 to 44 had 3.1 kids. That's above replacement level. If you're a couple, to replace yourself, you have to have 2.1 kids, okay? Don't ask me about the 0.1. You just got to be rocking and rolling when you do it, okay? It was above. 59% of women 40 to 44 had 3.1 kids or more in 1976. You fast forward to 2006, the average woman having 40 to 44 had 1.9 kids. That's below replacement level, and only 28% of the people fit that bill. Ladies, what happens when you all become educated, career-oriented, and start working? What happens to the age of marriage? It typically goes up. If the age of marriage goes up, what happens to the age of childbirth? It typically goes up. As those two things go up, you're constraining the number of years to have children, so you're not adding to the bottom of the gene pool, so we old fuddy duddys just get older and older. That's what graying and aging is all about in terms of the transition here. And then there's a group of us. So if it's 2.1 kids to replace yourself, who's replacing themselves in America? You got one group, folks. Don't fall for the okadoke. Don't fall for the okadoke of building a wall around your country and trying to send folk home. Non-Hispanic whites have had a total fertility rate between 1.7 and 1.9 for 2 decades. Now, I'm a bit confused by this 0.7 to 0.9 of a kid because I taught a few of them at Chapel Hill, but it takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself. So understand, if you're below replacement level, if you're not reproducing the talent, how do you get it? Y'all will figure that one out next week. Then there's a group of us born between 1946 and 1964. Let me see a show of hands. 1946, look around, y'all. Now, some people ain't raising their hand, they're lying. They're in this group, but it's okay. Those of us who have our hands up born between 1946 and 1964, part of the post-World War II hormonal rush in America, okay? It was our fathers who went off to World War II, and when they came back home, they got busy. They got busy to the tune of producing 81 million of us. We're the boomer generation. On January 1st of 2011, the first baby boomer born in America turned 65 and became eligible for what? Everything. Everything. Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, from 2011 to 2029, we boomers will be turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 per day. Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, 2011 to 2029. That's the pig and the python. That's that group of people who are doing what? Marching out of the labor market. Now, you will note that population, 81 million people, 45 to 64 in 2011, grew by 32%, 19.5 million people entering that group. You'll note the second most rapidly growing population was the 65-plus population. Why? That person turns 65 is going to live another 18.7 years, so you got longevity operating there. When we talk about the graying of America, that's what we're talking about. Extended life for the 65-plus population and this pig in the python group of boomers of 81 million people marching out of the labor market. Now, when somebody tells you that Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, do you know what that means? Somebody's paying in, all of us, but somebody else is spending our money, right? What needs to happen for those of us in the boomer generation to get some money out of the Social Security system? You Gen X, Gen Y, what y'all need to be doing? Working every day, EBDAY, yeah. 4 jobs, all benefits, paying into the system. But you got a slight problem. What happened to the 25 to 44-year-old population? It actually declined. So you got this huge wave of people aging out, and you got a declining population 25 to 44. Why would the population 25 to 44 be declining? Well, we had a baby bust. We stopped having children in sufficient numbers. But the thing that we have missed is some of the debilitating diseases that beset us boomers and pre-boomers later in life are now besetting Gen X and Gen Y earlier in life, leading to the early onset of death and disability. Taking people out. Some of it is lifestyle things. Obesity, diabetes. How many wars have we fought in the last 20 years? Who gets taken out in war? And then the opioid crisis. That's what it looked like in 1999. That's what it looked like in 2014. 11,000 people hospitalized daily and more than 100 deaths every day. Taking out prime working age people that we need to do what? Propel our nation. Pay into the system to support our government operations, so public services, and a whole range of other things. Connect the dots, ladies and gentlemen, between the browning of America on the one hand and the graying of America. You build a wall around your country and try to send everybody home that don't look like you or that you don't like. We got a slight problem, because it's these dynamics that are the key to our viability moving forward. This browning and graying thing at the intersection of the graying, what does that mean? It means for the first time in history, right now we have 4 generations in the workplace, and next year it will be 5. Everybody from the pre-boomer, born in 1945 and earlier, who's most familiar and in love with the rotary dial phone, to you millennials who waltz into work at 10:30 in the morning whistling with 2 buds in the ear, and all us boomers who arrive at 5:30 in the morning, because that's the way we roll. And the boomer looks at the millennial and says, look at that, that's a bad work ethic, come rolling up here at 10:30 in the morning. And the millennial takes the 2 buds out long enough to look at the boomer and say, you can't spell work ethic because I just finished walking in the door, what you've been navel-gazing at since 5:30 this morning. And oh, you look over there at Mr. Pre-Boomer, he's still trying to get the first rotary dial call out for the day. And then there's you with an HR system that is a one-size-fits that's costing you about $30 million a year and lost work productivity. We got to figure out how to make the adjustments in our workplace with these multi-generations. Remember that the Gen Z is about to enter the workplace, so we're talking about 5 generations. Those are the numbers of people across that. No. What does this mean? Succession planning in our organizations is going to be big. Sooner or later, all of us boomers and pre-boomers got to go. Got to go. So the question becomes, how do we think about replacing talent, fully recognize the next generation can't look like the previous generation? Why? Because the marketplace is changing dramatically. That's the succession thing. The other big thing is child care won't be your big issue in organizations moving forward. Fertility rates are down, right? What will it be? It will be elder care. And elder care is radically different from child care, isn't it? Child care is actually predictable, isn't it? You drop your crumb snatcher off at the daycare in the morning. You go pick them up at 5:30 in the evening. You may go at lunchtime, they do something they got no business, but typically that's the routine. But elder care is radically different, particularly if you have a loved one with what? Alzheimer's or dementia. You will have to figure out how to squeeze work in. And ladies and gentlemen, don't think that it's just us old fuddy-duddies who have elder care responsibilities. 10 million millennials in America have elder care responsibilities. And I know you're saying, well, how the heck can a millennial have elder care responsibilities? I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you how. Assume for the moment that I'm 55 years old. I'm not. Assume in my 55th year, I went through a midlife crisis. I didn't. Assume in my 55th year, my midlife crisis, I marry a 30-year-old. Heaven forbid. And assume in my 55th year, in my midlife crisis, my 30-year-old and I have a child. How old am I when that child turns 20? Old enough for the child to look at you and say, what the heck were you thinking? That's how you get there, folks. 10 million. You cannot look around the audience and tell me who has elder care responsibility, because it's not one of those visible diversity traits that you have to figure out. But understand that this is a game changer, and only about a third, about 38% of corporations have any accommodation in their HR policies for elder care responsibility. It is a huge thing, game changer moving forward. Cooling water from grandma's well and grandpa's too is about one of the most rapidly growing household types of the first decade of the new millennium. Grandparents raising grandchildren, okay? Grandparents raising grandchildren. If you look at all households with children in their living arrangements, all households with children actually decline because the fertility rates are down, declined by 1.2%, and households where no grandparents are present in the household decline, just husband and wife raising children, that decline. But look at households where grandparents are present, they grew by 1.8%, and you got two kinds of households where grandparents are present. Households where the grandparents are not responsible for child care, they're just multi-generational households. And then you have households where the grandparents are solely responsible for raising their grandchildren, and that's at the bottom. And what you will see is the most rapidly growing households where grandparents are solely responsible for grandchildren. Some of them are grandmother only, that grew by 7%. Grandfather only raising grandchildren grew by about 10%. And what's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, when you begin to look at these data, those red states, 50% or more of the grandparents in those states are responsible for raising their grandchildren. 50%. The golds, the orange, burnt orange, between 40 and 49% of the grandparents responsible for raising their grandchildren. And then it's an amazing kind of transformation in our society. What you need to understand is that 60% of these grandparents are between the ages of 30 and 59. What does that mean? Don't look all cross-eyed when one of your workers who's 32 years old walks up to you and say, I need time off today to go to school to check on my what? Grandchild. At our school in North Carolina, I have a 45-year-old great-grandmother as a caregiver. I didn't say grandmom, I said great-grandmother as a caregiver. Living arrangements are changing dramatically. You can moralize about it. You can do anything you want to about it. It's called life in America today, and we better build a system that is accommodative of the kinds of changes that we find ourselves in the midst of, because this is the reality. And what's important, 42% of these grandparents raising grandchildren have been responsible for raising their kids for 5 years or longer. Do the math. Do the math. It's a profound change in living arrangements that you have to accommodate in your school systems and understand what the challenges are moving forward. The end of men. Good news first. Women are about to surpass men as the numerical majority in the paid workforce in America. In 2010, women constituted 49.8% of all workers. But that's not because we've decided to treat you all ladies fairly. Okay? There's a huge gender wage gap out there, right? 81, 82%. Rather, that reality is because men are doing so poorly in American society today. What? 3 times as many men of working age do not work at all today compared to 1969. Why don't they work? They don't have the skills to compete. They're disabled, or they're what? Incarcerated. Disability rate has doubled. The wage rate, median wage rate, declined by about $13,000 after controlling for inflation. The biggest thing, though, that I want to draw to your attention is the last one. After peaking in 1977, male college completion rates have barely changed over the past 35 years. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for a decade. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, at birth, the sex ratio is not what? 60-40. It's more like what? 50-50. Where are the men? In 2010, and continuing to today, in 2010, we granted 572,000 more degrees to women in our higher education system than we did men. Where are the men? So, ladies, the good news is y'all are good-looking, educated, employed. The bad news is if you ain't hitched, forget about it. Ain't enough eligible, marriageable males to go around. If you define eligibility as having a comparable education to what you have. And I know this is true because I gave this lecture in Atlanta, and a lady stood up when I made this point. She stood up in the back of the room and says, you drove all the way down here to tell me that I've been living it for the last 20 years. I said, don't shoot the messenger for the message. Where are the men? Where are the men? If you want to see what it looks like in higher education, I don't know your school system, but I know mine. UNC system, 43% male. The predominantly white institutions, 45% male. Our minority-serving historically black colleges, 36% male. Our community colleges, 44% male. A couple of years ago, we had one school that was 80-20, 80% female, 20% male. I don't know why it wasn't like that when I was going to school. Boy. Obviously, I'm joking. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't have stable families, you can't have stable communities, stable anything where you have that kind of sex ratio imbalance in society. And if you've seen the latest data, among the college-educated population, women now surpass men as the numerical majority in the workforce. Among the college-educated population, where are the men? Where are the boys? I think that there's a clue to it, and I'm going to wrap up with this. It's called the triple whammy of geographic disadvantage. At the intersection, ladies and gentlemen, of the browning of America on the one hand and the graying of America on the other hand is this situation that I call the triple whammy that creates disadvantage for kids in our school system. Let me develop it for you. So if you look at school-age population, it's decline, and the decline is driven by a decline in the white population and the black population, but much of that decline has been offset by growth in the non-white groups, Hispanics, Asians, and other folk, but we're still declining, but we're seeing this shift in the school-age population. But it has to do with this decline of men, I think, has to do with the way the population is sorting itself out geographically. This is a county level map. Those red counties on this map are racial generation gap counties. What does that mean? The adult voting age population in those counties are predominantly white, aging empty nesters. But the school age population is predominantly non-white. What kinds of support for public education you think you get there? I ain't got no dog in the K-12 education fight. My kids are out of school. I'm most concerned about crime, safety, and retirement amenities, typically vote self-interest. The gold counties are minority counties. The adult voting age population predominantly non-white, school age population is predominantly non-white. Lots of interest in education. They're all low wealth counties. The tax base does not support a high quality education. The gray counties, the majority counties up there, are majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly white. The school age population is predominantly white. Lots of support for education and the like typically. But in those gray counties, about a fifth of the kids who go to school in those counties are kids of color. But if you peer beneath the veneer in those school districts and ask yourself the question, where are the kids of color? They are typically in one of two situations. They're either attending racially isolated schools in those districts, or in the quote-unquote good schools, they are underrepresented in the college prep tracks, AP, honors, IB, and the like. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the new majority that has to propel our nation, kids of color, between a rock and a hard place through no fault of their own in our public education system. That's whammy number one. Whammy number two, hypersegregation. Those red counties on the map, these are neighborhoods, census tract level data. 60% of the people who live in those neighborhoods are non-Hispanic white. In the gold counties, 60% or more of the population are non-white, is non-white. The yellow neighborhoods are transitioning from white to non-white. We call that hypersegregation, separate and unequal, probably rivals the segregation that existed in 1954, the year Brown versus the Board of Education. Whammy number two. Whammy number three, concentrated poverty. The red counties, 40% or more of the kids that walk in the school door every day come from household incomes below the poverty level. It's much closer to 90 or 140. And the orange counties, about 25 to 40%, 39% have incomes below the poverty level, kids who walk in the school door. We put those two together, we call that concentrated poverty. The yellow counties, the poverty rate of kids is less than 25%. We call that concentrated affluence. Ladies and gentlemen, the average kid of color that walks into a school district today comes from a set of counties where there's either little political or financial support for their school and a set of neighborhoods that are characterized by hypersegregation and concentrated poverty. How many kids? About 14 million kids fit that bill, and that population is 88% non-white. If you want to take two of those things, say concentrated poverty and segregation, about 21 million kids, that's 69% white. One of those things, 16 million kids, 33% for 24 million kids, 23 million kids, life is pretty good. They're not forced with those things. The triple whammy of geographic disadvantages erodes and challenges the opportunities for these kids to get a world-class education and to be able to compete globally. And I wish it ended there. Those are the food deserts. I have a school that made a mistake in Durham, North Carolina, and we're a booming place. My school, I asked a little girl one day, said, "What did you have for dinner last night?" And she looked at me and says, "Last night was not my turn to eat." She said, "At our house, we rotate who gets to eat dinner, and I get to eat every third night." I wish it ended there. Extreme disciplinary sanctions. 3 million kids suspended and expelled from school annually, and a third of them referred to the police for misdemeanor charges as early as the first grade. Those are the black kids. Those are the Latino kids. We don't have to look hard, ladies and gentlemen, to figure out where these kids are, and that many of them are little black and brown boys who disappear from the system. It starts there's something called a third grade, fourth grade failure syndrome. They begin to disengage. They get to about the 9th grade, and then they do what? They drop out. It's a competitiveness issue. I don't have time to develop the whole thing for you, but let me say, ladies and gentlemen, until we reframe this issue as a competitiveness issue, yes, it's a moral issue, until we connect the dots between immigration and aging and the fact that this is the next generation that has to propel our nation, we're going to be in deep yogurt in this country if we don't pay attention. I got 12 seconds. That gets time to get off the stage, so thank you very much.